Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about something in Bit Heroes. When I first created my alt accounts, I immediately went for a tank build very early on. So think of this as a part 2 of my previous video where I talk about my why I tier camp on my two alt accounts. So I'll tell you a story about my main account. It used to be a DPS from the start, like from the very beginning. Throughout the time, I was using several DPS sets like Arsenal, Camouflage, Lucernas, Montezuma, El Corvo, up until I used the Firent or Firent set from the Tier 20 raid. It was for a brief time, but I moved on from that set. Not gonna lie, I wish I did not melt it. But anyway, after I beaten the Clover Dungeon, I started to invest heavily into crafting the Witchem set, a new mythic pet, accessory, and a dedicated mount for my first tank build. So from tier 19 onwards, I became a full-time tank using the ever so popular Witchem set, like I mentioned earlier. Using the evade chance to essentially let the enemy attacks fly by me. Although the evade chance is capped at 75%, with Clover, you can essentially bump it to around 93%. And to this day, I have two main tank sets that I use pretty much on all content, and that is the Witchem and Ancient tank sets. Eventually, I'll be able to use a third tank set that is catered towards a specific world boss, and that is Project Goodall. But that set is still not complete, so I'm still working on it. I did some reflection on one of my two alt accounts. I'll start with my tier 10. My tier 10 was created 3 years ago, originally just to camp tier 2 because back then the gems that you get from tier 2 events are amazing. I believe each event is like 800 gems max, so you get like 2400 gems in total. But then the dev team changed the rewards so that you get like 300 gems per reset instead of 2400, and that pissed a lot of people, including myself. So after that incident, I decided to camp tier 10 instead. After reaching tier 10, I stayed in that tier for the next 3 years. I invested a lot in building my tank stats. Well, maybe just on what do you call this? Investing a lot on attack power. So over the next 3 years, it's slowly getting stacked now. Even more recently, I created another alt account that pretty much follows the same path as my tier 10, except he's gonna camp tier 4 for the time being. Until he's ready, he's gonna cap tier 7 next for the mythic fusion, and that is Tarbis, the mythic evade bait familiar from the festive flux invasion that only appears once a year. Now you might be wondering, why am I going for a tank build very early on? There's a few reasons that I can share. The first one is mainly to solo world bosses on heroic. Now, at tier 4, there's only like legendary gear, so there's not much else to pay attention there. But this is also nice because I won't rely much on other players. That would waste too much time waiting for other people to join. Sometimes no players will even join my lobby, so there's just so much downtime that I just decided I would solo the entire world boss alone, and I wouldn't have to worry about other people joining because I can also set it to private, so not much downtime. The second is with a decent defensive pet, I won't die easily because the pet's healing is based on how much power or attack that you have, and the enemies thankfully don't have a brain augment, so they wouldn't hurt as much. unless if you're in tier 16, sorry, and that's where enemies start to have augments equipped on them. The third is I wanted to invest a lot into damage reduction over block chance, since I did the calculations, and if I don't get a defensive accessory that gives a lot of block chance, then I would just invest into damage reduction instead. However, the story is different for Combo because during his tier 2 days, he got a legendary accessory that gives like 68% block chance at max upgrade. So naturally, I invest that to a few block enchants and runes. Now, for the fourth and final reason is um, I want to farm long enough to get a mythic mount. I've mentioned on my tier camping video that I'm going for a specific mythic mount that gives damage reduction, and that is Refuge. Now, I do have Refuge on my tier 10, and it's slowly getting maxed out. On my tier 4, however, I'd have to farm long enough to get my first mythic mount and possibly a second mythic mount in the future. So you might be asking, why tier 4 and tier 10? Why not other tiers? Well, one of the comments I made where I basically said that I had no reason to camp tier 4, but looking back, I have a few reasons now. The first reason is, and this is just for tier 4, the event rewards here give a decent amount of epic materials. If you place high enough just from doing your dailies, like me, I log in twice a day, so I always placed relatively high in the rankings, like somewhere in the 6th to the 25th place. Also, this is great for upgrading gear pieces and for direct crafting mythic enchants. I get like 150 total per reset, and I don't even notice it as time goes on. I just let it save up. Now, this means that I won't have to worry about having a lack of epic materials because directly crafting a mythic enchant costs like 1000 epic materials each. And I needed like 6 of those for just one bonus, like damage reduction, for example. Now, the second reason is, and this is for my tier 10, but this can also apply for my tier 4. But basically, I'm back farming or just farming familiars from previous tiers without having to worry about other things. And this is the problem with my main account because back then I was rushing through the zones without realizing that I needed so much more stuff. Examples like I was farming for Lurky, the mythic DPS familiar from Nordic Dream, for over 2 years. At the same time, I was also farming for ancients like the Soul of Iscarium, Shield of Iscarium, Furium Helmet, Starweave, and other familiars that needed for the endgame. So that's a lot of goals or a lot of lists to do, so I get overwhelmed pretty quick. My goals are pretty much all over the place, which is why I prefer to slow down and focus on one thing at a time. On my tier 10, I'm focusing on getting decent augments, whether they are mythic or legendary, and I've been saving my gems so I can bribe the raid boss from tier 7 for Tarbis. So, two things at a time that I'm focusing on. Now, for my tier 4, I am focusing on saving 600 component cream to get my first defensive mythic accessory. I'm saving my mount guts to essentially melt it for my first mythic mount, and I'm saving my gems for God knows what I'll spend it on. So I'll just keep saving for the time being. Now, at tier 9 plus or just tier 9 onwards, on the event rewards, you start to get raid fusion mats if you want to create a specific fusion using the raid mats that you get from the events. So you won't have to get burdened by running thousands of raids. just to get them wasted on how much shards that you use. Like for example, I'm in tier 10 and I originally planned to farm for Stratos, but one Stratos rather is like 1050 raid mats, and I believe, I'm not sure, I'm uncertain about this, but you get like one raid mat every 2 runs, and you need like 1050 for one Stratos, and I plan to make 6 of them. So I decided not to pursue it eventually, but I am instead focusing on making Forbon, the mythic absorb tank from tier 10. He is quite more expensive than Stratus, but the raid mats that I have saved is around 3,000 3,500, and I plan to make 6 of him, so I'm pretty much halfway there. And as I said earlier, the event rewards give me the raid fusion mats, so I get like I believe around 2 to 300 per reset. So that is slowly accumulating. So that is nice. Now, if you focus on runes and augments, they start to matter around tier 6 or tier 7, I believe. Funny story, there was one time on my tier 10 alt where I got the top 1 spot in PvP, and that surprised me because I wasn't really pushing for the top 1 spot. I was just farming PvP for the mythic colors. Some additional goals or plans for both of my alt accounts. The first thing is that I want to get several triangle runes that I would like to have since they are good for tanks survivability. I'll start with the relic rune. First one is Bolly rune for the SP generation whenever I get hit. This is especially nice for my tier 10 because he is using the Apocalypse set with the Cursed main hand. If I have Volley rune, I'd essentially have like 4 SP before getting my first turn, so I'd be able to use my 2 SP skill to essentially kill the enemy in one turn, if I'm lucky. But besides that, the next one is the Argus rune for the extra damage reduction whenever I get hit. The third one is the Gala rune for another way to gain some health back besides from my defensive pet whenever I get hit. The final one is the Wall rune to get some shields back whenever I get hit. Now those are for the relic runes. Next is the artifact runes. I'll start with the Harnock rune for the extra damage reduction if I have the lowest health in the entire team. If I go solo, this bonus stays active, so that's really nice. Next is the Nonic rune for the extra damage reduction while my health is full. And the third one is the Melga rune. This makes it so that it ignores enemy offensive bonuses whenever I get hit. So those are the triangle runes. For the second plan or goal, I did mention this in my tier camping video, but I'll mention it again. I want to save or hoard more resources before rushing through tier 7 and camp there for who knows how long. For my tier 10, it's essentially just similar, especially for raids. I want to persuade and bribe the raid boss until I have 9 of him. So I would fuse him into Tarbis, then I would use him for all content, especially in PvP. Now for my tokens, tickets, and badges, there will be a point in the future that I'll push for the number 1 spots on all of those events, but at the moment it doesn't feel like I have enough to compete for the top spot, so I'll keep saving. The third is getting a few mythic runes from direct crafting. I'm still standing with my verdict that I'll only put or craft legendary runes on my tier 4, but eventually I'll have enough materials to directly craft them. Now it depends on what rune that I want. Maybe the ones I mentioned earlier, which is the triangle runes, but I'm still trying to consider which rune I'll craft. For the fourth goal or plan, I'm planning to get Armstrong, the epic evade tank from Gallus Apotheosis World Boss. Once I'm in tier 7, I plan to get him because his kit looks interesting. He has a 0 SP bleed closest and a 4 SP bleed random enemy, which the damage numbers looks nice. He is pretty cheap. He requires 3 gems from Zone to Dungeon 3 and 10 of the World Boss fusion material. So I guess pretty cheap-ish for an epic fusion. Now for the fifth and final goal or plan on my tier 4, once I'm done with my defensive runes and enchants, I'm planning on getting a few offensive runes and enchants when I start to make my DPS build. And this is pretty much what I'm doing on my tier 10, but because I got another defensive accessory that gives damage reduction and absorb a few days ago, I decided to pause that production and focus on getting a few absorb enchants and runes. So some final thoughts on camping a certain tier. Now, if you want to camp a tier that's not tier 4 or tier 10, for example, there are some factors that you need to consider. First thing is that some tiers have slightly easier competition to obtain legendary accessories on Trials or Gauntlet. But that depends on your team setup, what difficulty you are choosing, how quick you can clear it, and how much time you plan to play and push for the top spot. Of course, the higher the difficulty that you can do on full auto, the more points that you can get. But again, factor in how quick you can clear it. That also depends on your team setup. Personally, I'd recommend pushing Gauntlet instead of Trials because it's a lot quicker than Trials. Now for PvP, where the legendary pet resides, it's a lot quicker to clear since it's just one enemy team. But never take for granted on setting up a good PvP team for quick clears just to chase that top 1 spot. Now, if you really, really want to push for that number 1 spot, you have no choice but to stay up late or until there's a few hours left before the reset, just to guarantee that top 1 spot, and hopefully you still have enough resources by then because people will literally snipe that top 1 spot without you noticing, whether you go to sleep with a few hours left before the reset. So just pay attention to the rankings. Now, if you camp a certain tier, focus on one thing at a time so you won't just get overwhelmed like what happened to me on my main account. Just be patient and I promise it will pay off in the long run. Next is if you plan on buying a box, whether it's a mega box or hyper boxes for both the pet and accessory, I'd recommend going for the mega boxes first to guarantee an epic pet and an accessory, while still having a 21% chance to get a legendary. Now, it is a lot more expensive than hyper boxes, but it could at least get you an epic pet and accessory. Although mine was different for both of my accounts, I immediately went for hyper boxes because they are cheaper. The chance to get a legendary was pretty low, but the amount of accessories and pets that I'll get is a lot more than the mega box. I could essentially save up to 10 hyper boxes and hoping I'd get one and with some luck get two legendaries even. If I didn't get anything from the hyper boxes, I'd just melt them to get some component cream or critter jelly. Now, there is some argument to be made that it's better to camp tier 8 to tier 20 for the sets, ancients, and mythics, and honestly, that is fair. I could easily recommend camping tier 8 to tier 11, maybe even tier 12 even, but not tier 13, because from what I've heard, it is easily the not most, the second most competitive tier, while tier 21 is the most competitive. And that's pretty much it for my part 2 of this tier camping video. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you on to the next one. Maybe another short or long form video like this, but who knows. I'll see you either way.